This is StratNews Global, and you're watching Talking Point with me, Amitabh, Revi. For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates. We're discussing External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar's visit to America, and joining us from Washington, D.C. is Akriti Vasudeva. She's a resident analyst with the Stimson Centre and Editor-at-large, South Asian Voices. Akriti, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
From the same city, Atman M. Trivedi, he's the MD of the international consultancy Hills and Company, which was founded by former U.S. Trade Representative Carla Hills, and has Ambassador Tom Pickering, who's been a U.S. envoy to Russia, India, Israel, and the UN in the past. Atman is also a non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council. He's a member of the U.S. Council for U.S. China Relations, has been working in the past with the Obama administration in commerce and trade departments as well. But the most interesting thing I found on your CV was that part of your family is a pup. I don't know whether he or she is still a pup, but that was great to hear.
Still a pup. We're approaching the one-year birthday on the U.S. Independence Day, July 4th.
Pleasure having you, Akriti. Just getting into the meetings that the External Affairs Minister has already had. There's some more top-of-the-line ones that are coming up. But interesting to see the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Lahanes, who met him. I mean, even if they do meet at that level, it's not really publicized a lot. What's the significance of that? What would they have been talking about?
Thanks so much, Amitabh. Yeah, I think that was a quite an interesting and symbolic meeting, I think, because mainly the main agenda of this meeting has been health cooperation, has been, COVID, supply chains, vaccine production. But there is still a lot of, subtext of China in a lot of the meetings that have happened. So the meeting that you mentioned, of course, with the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Lahanes, I think, that comes kind of in the context of the U.S. providing intelligence support to India during the ongoing Ladakh standoff, and during kind of the closer strategic cooperation between India and the U.S. So I think that is kind of meant to be a signal that while we are focusing on the immediate challenges of coronavirus, of the pandemic, we're still continuing the strategic cooperation, the close coordination on intelligence, on defense, on security, on the Indo-Pacific.
I mean, like Akriti saying, a lot of symbolism, but there is obviously behind closed doors of what we don't know, which is not disclosed publicly, in terms of the substance that would be involved. There might even be a drop-in by POTUS.
Yeah, that could very much be a possibility. The U.S.-India relationship enjoyed support and attention at the highest levels of our government, from President Biden on down. And I think you're seeing that reflected in the robust and wide-ranging set of meetings that Minister Jaishankar has had thus far. You mentioned meeting with the DNI. I think that meeting and the fact that it was publicized shows how far the U.S.-India relationship has come, that a meeting between the Indian foreign minister and our intelligence lead would be something that would be highlighted. And perhaps that's intended to send a message to countries in the region, and also highlight the importance of cooperation and the ongoing collaboration on issues from COVID-19 to cybersecurity, to certainly activities in the region by other countries that could impact both Indian and U.S. national interests.
Akriti, wide-ranging, as both of you are saying, these meetings, one of the key focuses, even though the Ministry of External Affairs doesn't want it to be called mission vaccine, but has been, because undoubtedly of the situation in India, of both vaccines. There was also that initial hesitancy or lack of movement from the US that got a flurry of activity on social media as well, which hopefully now has been put on the back burner.
Yeah, so I think the kind of early, I wouldn't wouldn't call it hesitation, but maybe, not as quick action on the part of the US government to provide support to India was, I think, partly because of kind of the bureaucratic challenges, because the Biden administration didn't have an ambassador in India at that time. So I think part of it was that, and part of it was because the administration was still trying to figure out what its policy was on kind of donating vaccines to the world. So I think that's why you saw that initial delay. But since then, the US government has really stepped up to support India, and we've seen that it's provided about $500 million worth of COVID relief to India in the last few weeks. And I think it's interesting, actually, that normally you hear in the US-India relationship the focus on people-to-people ties, on security, on defense. But in the last few months, even before the second COVID wave, we've heard both Washington and New Delhi officials highlight the importance of health cooperation and put greater emphasis on that, on vaccine development, on other things. And I think initially this focus was more on kind of the global level, because the US was looking at India as the manufacturer of vaccines globally and regionally, and in the context of the Quad vaccine initiative. But I think since then it's become much more bilateral, obviously, because of the tense COVID situation with the second wave in India, and India requiring support itself. So a large part of Ms. Jaishankar's meetings was the focus on trying to procure vaccines, trying to fasten the provision of raw materials for vaccine production, making sure that the US and other countries support the waiver for intellectual property rights on COVID vaccines at the WTO. And I think we've seen that focus continue probably today as well in the meetings with Secretary Blinken. And
Just picking up from the last point, Atman, that Akriti made in terms of the USTR as well, who had issued that statement about supporting what India and South Africa had started, I think, in October last year at the WTO in terms of waivers. The US is saying only waivers for vaccines, but how close really is that? Won't that really take a long time if it happens, that is?
Well, I think it is a major and significant step that the US has said that it will go to the WTO and it'll support a temporary waiver for countries on the basis of national health emergency. That's a major step that reflects the need for fairness and equity, and a recognition that no one is safe until everyone is safe in a global pandemic. And that's very consistent, I think, with the message that Minister Jaishankar is sharing and conveyed at the United Nations and now in his meeting at Washington. So I think there's a close convergence on that issue. Of course, achieving a waiver, a global waiver, requires consensus at the WTO. And so the US and India and other partners will have to work together closely to try to make sure the WTO is able to provide that waiver, given that time is of the essence. And of course, the focus for all of us right now is avoiding a third disastrous COVID wave in India.
Right. Akriti, if you want to take that in terms of, there's been a lot of meetings that he's had with USIBC, with the other people who've been helping. In terms of the WTO, how realistic is that?
I think on the waiver, I just want to echo what Atman already said. I think the idea there is not so much about kind of the immediate help in production for India. I think the idea is about, because India is producing and supplying vaccines for the Gavi COVAX facility, is actually going to impact the ability of some of the low and middle income countries to be vaccinated. So I think the focus is on trying to ensure that India is able to honor its commitments to the Gavi COVAX facility and be able to help countries in Africa and other places be vaccinated. But I think in the immediate, it will have to be, India have to kind of focus on getting vaccines from the US to tide itself over in the next few months with its domestic situation.
Since you do a lot of work in terms of consulting or advising Forbes 200 companies, in terms of trade, now where does India and the US really stand? It was March 2 years back where Piyush Goyal said, you're just a phone call away from some kind of a limited trade deal. But of course, that was under Trump. How important is that, considering the geopolitical situation? We've seen what aspirational moves have happened with the EU as well and India.
Well, I think the trade cooperation is a critical one in the relationship. Right now, we're rightfully focused on pandemic recovery in India, and also India's critical role in being a global supplier to the world. But of course, the longer term focus for both countries, the U.S. and India, is a robust recovery from the pandemic and really growing our economies and increasing jobs. And trade is a critical part of that equation. Both countries need to be more integrated in regional supply chains. And I think there is an understanding to that effect in both India and the U.S. USTR Catherine Tai has had good conversation thus far with Minister Goyal. They've agreed to take an approach to trade that is more strategic in nature, that isn't going to get bogged down in the sort of transactional type of dynamics that we saw in the last administration. But it would be nice if the sides were able to achieve some kind of an understanding to increase market access in both countries and really start making progress in the trade and commercial space to a greater degree than we've seen in the past. I mean, we're seeing trade volumes grow in both directions, despite some of the trade differences at the government-to-government level. But the governments need to catch up to what's happening in the private sectors. And that'll have important positive strategic spillover effects, since we know that a strong economy is the basis for an influential, more powerful role in the region and the world for both the U.S. and India.
Akriti, you want say something on the trade subject, or I also want to just put in a question which is directed to both of you, from Shai Desi, who says, how does the Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, although that's speculation, fit in as the next ambassador of the U.S. to India? The reasons she's asking for, and how do both of you see that?
So on the trade bit, I just want to say one point. I agree with everything that Atman said. I think what I've noticed over the last about 10 to 12 years is, or maybe even longer, is that the strategic side and the defense and security side of the U.S.-India relationship has been the driver of ties. And, the trade and economic side has not been neglected, but it's been much more difficult and has become a big irritant in the relationship. And I think that's that's an issue of concern. It's something that we should be watching for, because if there are any, hiccups on the defense and security side at all, the relationship will become, kind of much more difficult because of the economic issues. And to Atma's point, India needs to develop its comprehensive national power, and that requires, economic capabilities as well. That it will invest in defense, in its regional role in South Asia and the Indo-Pacific. On the nomination or potential nomination of U.S. ambassador, I think from what I know of the LA Mayor Eric Garcetti, he does have a close relationship with the Biden administration, particularly the president, and he has his trust. So I think that indicates again the importance that the Biden administration is according to India and how critical that relationship is going forward. Yeah, I think that's what I want to say on that. I think Atma will probably have more of a background on this.
Go ahead, Atma.
Thank you, Kriti. No, I agree with what you said. I think it reflects the importance and the significance to India that the president is considering nominating Mayor Garcetti, a close ally, somebody with political visibility. For the viewers in India, he was someone who was discussed as a potential presidential candidate, and then a potential cabinet official early on. in the Biden administration. And so he has the relationships, certainly the one that matters the most with the president, the heft and the visibility. And also as mayor of LA, a big city, obviously, that has a global reach, an Indo-Pacific city. He established an international office, which is led by a deputy mayor who was a U.S. ambassador to ASEAN during the Obama years. So I think that shows that he is outward looking, that he knows the Indo-Pacific region is an important priority for the U.S. as well as local economies like Los Angeles. And I expect if he is nominated, would be a strong ambassador who would have no problem with people picking up the phone to receive his phone calls from Delhi here in Washington.
Right. Akriti, you were talking about the Quad. I was just looking at, I think it was Global Times, which had talked about Jaishankar's visit and saying, the Jaishankar Blinken meeting will include topics that target China, but have a real, very little impact. I think that was their opinion, edited piece. But in terms of what's happened post, the Quad visual online meeting, and now they're talking about maybe in the fall, they have an in-person one. And the Quad plus 3, which has been looking at, supply chains and vaccines and other initiatives as well. The ME had issued a statement. I think it was, again, it was Begun who started those 10 conversations between all 6-7 sides, and they continued for a while. Your comments on that?
So I think on the Quad, what has been interesting to me, particularly, recent comments by the Indo-Pacific coordinator for the U.S, Kurt Campbell, suggesting that a priority area for the in-person Quad summit is actually going to be infrastructure. And I think this is really significant because, before kind of the Quad leader level summit or before this, there were formal dialogues between the U.S, Japan, and Australia on infrastructure, between India, Japan, and the U.S. But there was nothing at the level of the Quad, even though they had a lot of discussions on this matter, including at the Quad leader level summit. But I think the fact that we're seeing this now is a sign of maturity for the Quad, because from my understanding, working together on infrastructure development, particularly in third countries, requires harmonizing guidelines and standards and policies, which is very hard to do, particularly for India, which has not done as much in the multilateral domain in third countries on infrastructure. So the fact that this is happening now, and especially in kind of the aftermath of COVID, shows that the Quad countries have reached a level of maturity, as I said, and they are increasingly concerned about China and wanting to provide alternatives to China in the region. And I think, again, the Quad plus 3 that you were talking about was an initiative of the Trump administration, and it was essentially meant to be a coordination mechanism for countries to discuss, best practices for dealing with COVID, vaccine development, post-pandemic recovery. And I think it's really significant that the Biden administration has continued that call, despite it having been a relic of the previous administration, because it shows that that the U.S. is really looking to be provider of help and support in the pandemic to other countries, and it's looking at partners like India, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea. Other iterations have also included Brazil and Israel as partners in wanting to increase the capacity of Indo-Pacific countries so that they're able to push back against Chinese coercion and have alternatives, whether it's on technology, whether it's on supply chains, whether it's on infrastructure.
Right. I think I'll just pull up also a White House statement, because if I remember correctly, it was in March when Biden was asked a question and he talked about this Atman. Your views on how infrastructure can be used in the Indo-Pacific and elsewhere as an alternative to the BRI, because Biden mentioned that specifically.
Well, I think the most interesting element of the administration's focus on the Quad thus far, Amitabh, is is the fact that there's been an emphasis on putting forward an affirmative, positive economic agenda, and an agenda on issues like emerging technology, now on infrastructure, that is competitive with alternatives in the region, including China's Belt and Road Initiative. The rhetoric from global times notwithstanding, the Quad initiative so far has not been any kind of anti-China arrangement under the Biden administration. I think what really stands out is this positive, affirmative attempt to develop alternatives to provide public goods in the region and to show that democracies are still capable of doing big things. And that, I think, is the overriding message that comes out from the first leader-level meeting of the Quad that, as you said, took place in March. The fact that they tried to address a global problem that has affected all of us in the pandemic, and they created this very creative and innovative international division of labor with India at the center as the main supplier and producer of COVID-19 vaccines. And now we're seeing it moving forward in the infrastructure space. Infrastructure is, of course, another important public good that's required by all the countries in the region. Southeast Asia, parts of South Asia have acute infrastructure needs. The ADB has documented how big that need is in the region. And someone needs to fill it in a way that reflects transparency, openness, the rule of law, and principles of contract sanctity, things that businesses in the West are uniquely capable to provide. And so it's exciting. It's, again, not some kind of a containment arrangement against China. It's about doing things that make a concrete difference and an improvement of the lives of the people across the vast and dynamic Indo-Pacific region.
Sure, but the private sector's hesitancy to get into infrastructure projects might be something to watch out for. When you're talking about transparency and openness, I'm just taking this, Akriti, for you, Varun Pratap, top official of the Biden administration, who said that U.S. China engagement era has come to an end, and there's, of course, Biden's given 3 months for a report on the origins of COVID. I think Facebook has reversed its policies also on what was earlier called conspiracy theories. Your comments on that, Akriti?
So I think, yes, there has obviously been a shift in U.S. perceptions of China in the last few years. And I actually wrote a paper on this, kind of tracing how the evolution happened. So this actually goes back to the Bush era, kind of the 99, 2000, around that time. Condoleezza Rice at that time had said that China is a strategic competitor of the U.S. Over time, what happened was that at that time, of course, there were concerns about Chinese companies, stealing intellectual property rights from the U.S. And kind of other coercive actions. But because the Bush administration was busy with wars in Iraq and looking at other issues, they were not really able to focus on the threat as much. And then in the Obama administration, there was a focus on China, but then they want to kind of balance. I mean, Atman can speak to this, but I think they wanted to kind of balance between having some stability in the relationship and seek cooperation on areas like climate change and North Korea, but also push China on things like militarization of the South China Sea. But as China continued to posture territorially with countries around the region, whether that was Japan or Taiwan or Bhutan, and kind of kept up its advancement in military capabilities, what then happened was the Trump administration again labeled China as a strategic competitor. And then you saw around that time, in fact, Scott Campbell, who I said is the Indo-Pacific coordinator at the moment, he and Jake Sullivan had written a paper, and Eli Ratner also wrote a paper about how China has really kind of taken advantage of the U.S. Opening up to China and wanting to build a better relationship in terms of economics and everything else. And so now we're at the point where it seems like there, in the US, the sense is that all of the approaches of trying to have a better relationship with China have been tried, engagement has been tried. And so now we are kind of pursuing this era of competition because China has taken kind of the military and economic advantage, and the US needs to fight back.
Atman, do you see that as inevitable, or like many countries in the region, in Southeast Asia, the ASEAN, who feel that America could make a U-turn at some point of time if it suits them?
Well, I think as Akriti laid out, the U.S. government, and you heard this from the Indo-Pacific coordinator a couple of days ago, Kurt Campbell, saying that now the dominant feature in U.S. China relations is competition. The era of cooperation with China, at least as we knew it, is now over, he said. And I think that's not a reflection of major changes necessarily in what has happened here in the U.S. It reflects changes that have taken place in China's approach to the world, to its own people, since 2012. And the current leadership over most of the last decade has taken a much more aggressive approach, first and foremost towards India in the high Himalayas, in violent historic clashes, but really across the region in the South China Sea, increasing sorties in the Taiwan Straits, pressure on Japan, and not to mention the challenges and the repression in Xinjiang, Hong Kong. And so there's a sense that the Chinese government has changed, and that our ability to shape its choices is maybe not what we thought it was. And so the best course of action is to focus on ourselves, building back better, as the president calls it, at home, strengthening the fundamentals of our democracy, and first and foremost internationally, being a close friend and partner to all our allies out there, and really trying to find common ground, including on this range of important issues that we have with China.
Akriti, like you said one earlier, one of the things that would have been discussed when you're talking about India and US ties, right at the top would have been defense and strategy, because strategic partnership. And leaving that last just shows, the time you are in. But that is a crucial pillar, right, Akriti?
Yes, definitely. It is a crucial pillar, and it has been for quite some time. And I think we've seen growing cooperation and coordination on that, not just kind of defense and security in the bilateral sense, but also in the Indo-Pacific. So obviously, we've seen the signing of the foundational defense agreements between the US and India, which allow both the militaries to be more interoperable and do exercises with each other, and also, plan for potential conflict in the future. We've seen the Quad, Malabar exercise that happened. We've seen the countries kind of wanting to provide, options to those in the Indo-Pacific. For example, India has on its own provided lines of credit to Vietnam and countries of that nature. But I think there's also a lot more conversation about how the Quad and particularly US and India want to cooperate in the region, even when it comes to capacity building of countries in Southeast Asia or elsewhere in the Indo-Pacific that are targets of Chinese coercion. And I think one issue that you probably will ask about or want to know about is on the CAATSA sanctions, on the S-400 delivery systems. I think my sense is that, and I think I'm drawing on the work of my colleagues at CSIS, Rick Rosso and Priti Upadhyay, and I think they've written a piece of that. Most of the conditions required for a waiver for India are actually possible, but likely it's going to be comes down to kind of political considerations about whether a waiver would be granted. So I think signs are positive, but we'll have to kind of wait and watch how that issue goes.
I wanted to take that because that was going to be my next obvious question on CAATSA and what is likelihood both sides, I mean, at least the US side, when Austin was here, or even otherwise when spokespeople are asked, say, you've not reached that stage when India takes the supplies of the S-400 squadrons, and that's when something could happen. But how do you read it, Atman?
I think it's a topic that's been talked about a lot over the last year or two. Look, India has had a long-standing and important defense relationship with Russia. And I think that's well understood by the strategic community in Washington. At the same time, the U.S. has had troubled relations with Russia. Its interference in the 2016 and 2020 election, its flouting of international norms, including through the military incursion in the Ukraine in 2014. And so it's a country with whom our relationship is very complicated. And there are also questions, of course, about the interoperability of U.S. equipment, military equipment with India, given the S-400's state-of-the-art capabilities. And those issues will need to be worked out among the partners. But I'm hopeful that an arrangement and an understanding can be reached between the U.S. and India, because now is not the time for differences on defense and strategic matters, given all that is happening in the region and the world.
Trivedi, really appreciate your experience and your time coming on StratNews. All the best, and do stay safe, you, your family, which includes that 1-year-old pup whose name I forgot to ask.
Rocket.
All the best to Rocket as well. Thanks so much, Atman. I don't know whether you want to take this, because there are a couple of important meetings that are still to come. Blinken, Austin, and probably a drop-in by the POTUS. But how do you rate the EM's visit, 1 to 10? Chai Desi asks.
I give it pretty close to a 10. It sounds like there's very robust, serious, energetic consultations taking place. And I'm just really pleased to see the breadth of the discussions, who the minister is meeting with. And it just reflects the richness, the growth, and the momentum in the bilateral relationship.
Chai Desi, thanks. The breadth of this discussion as well to both of you. Do you want to take that, Akriti, 1 is to 10?
I will say that we have not seen kind of the full visit yet, and we have a few more meetings to go. And I think that the fruit is kind of in the outcomes of these meetings and what actually happens in terms of concrete actions, but definitely in the sense of optics and symbolism and reception. To Atma's point, the fact that Minister Jaishankar was able to meet so many high-level officials and kind of given the diplomatic red carpet, I think that is definitely significant. But we'll have to wait and watch on sort of the outcomes and the substance of the visit, because a few meetings are still left.
Thank you for your time and experience as well. We'll gladly have both of you back at some point of time. Thanks, Akriti.
Thank you so much, Amitabh.
Pleasure's all ours. And just a reminder to our viewers to click on that bell icon on YouTube so that you get notified when we put videos like this, to subscribe to our channel as well. It's important that those numbers go up for us to continue our work. And to help us do that, you can also support us financially. Just go onto our website. The link should be in the descriptor. To follow our social media handles as well on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You've been watching The Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh.